the U.S. Trade Representative begins its Section 301 probe hearing today with India, amongst other countries, under scrutiny. Senior Commerce Ministry officials and industry body representatives to present India's counter to the USTR proposal to impose tariffs. U.S. President Donald Trump ups the ante against Iran, saying Washington will probably strike Tehran tonight, just hours after declaring the ceasefire was over and ruling out further engagement with Iran. He also warns that U.S. could reinstate its blockade of the Iranian force and take control of the Kurg Island, raising specter of fresh escalations in the conflict. Stocks on the Wall Street open with deep cuts as Trump's comments fuel sharp spike in crude oil prices, with Brent hovering above $78 per barrel. All three U.S. benchmark indices trade in red. Dow falls over 800 points. Benchmark indices nosedive after Trump's ceasefire comments spook investors. Nifty closes over 500 points lower at 23,880 levels. The biggest intraday drop since March 23rd. All sectoral indices close in the red. SBI Funds Management has filed the red herring prospectus for its IPO. The issue will open on July 14 and close on July 16, offering up to 20.37 crore shares. On the sidelines of the NATO summit, Trump meets Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and declares that a resolution to the Ukraine war was getting closer. He also grants Ukraine the right to produce Patriot missiles, bolstering Kyiv's long-term air defense capabilities against Russia's aerial attacks. Now, the IMF trims India's FY27 GDP growth forecast to 6.4% from 6.5%, citing persistent geopolitical headwinds weighing on the global economy. But there's a twist. IMF has raised India's FY28 growth outlook to 6.7% from 6.5%, as it expects a sharp recovery once global crude prices stabilize. Hello and welcome to Business at 9. I'm Shabani Gharat. Now, Indian team comprising of Commerce Ministry officials, CII, FICCI and APIDA will present India's counter to USTR's proposed 12.5% tariff over Section 301 investigation findings. The USTR hearings relate to the practices of 60 economies around forced labor and concern. These hearings and India's response are significant amid the ongoing trade talks between India and US. So how will the outcome of the hearings impact the ongoing trade negotiations? We discuss that tonight with our special guest. He is Jain Dasgupta, former ambassador and representative of India at WTO. Mr. Dasgupta, thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining us today on Business at 9. Now, what is the case that, the Indian representatives will present to USTR during the hearing of Section 301 investigations, according to you?
301 proceedings have been initiated against about 60 countries. And it is not about forced labor being used to produce goods in the country and then being exported to the US. The real matter is that countries may be importing. The allegation against all these 60 countries, including the European Union, UK, Australia, Japan, etc., is that they are not banning the import of products into their market which have been produced using forced labor. So the US claim is that its exports to these countries get affected because the of the underpriced forced labor products which are coming in from other sources into these countries. Now, this is something which the USTR and in the Section 301 proceedings, the Office of the USTR carries out an investigation and recommends. And then it is upon the USTR to finally impose duties. So the Office of the USTR has recommended a range of 10% to 12.5% duties on products coming from these 60 countries. Now, India will, of course, present its case
Right.
forcefully that it does not allow imported
Now,
goods to come in.
Mr. Dasgupta, sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Dasgupta, but we have the July 22nd deadline staring at us, which is just 2 weeks away, so to speak. So, for the India-US trade deal, so how will the USTR hearing and India's counter to the 12.5% tariff proposal impact the conversations and, this July 22nd deadline that we are looking at?
July 24th deadline for the 10% tariffs which the US has imposed, that runs its life of 150 days. So it will have to get withdrawn. Now, in lieu of that, the US has two 301 proceedings which are proceeding. One of them is the forced labor thing, 60 countries. The other one is about excess capacity. And that is against 16 countries, including China, India, and Japan, and the others. So these will be used as leverage by the US to pressure India into agreeing to 18%, which it had agreed to in February 2026. Before the Supreme Court had struck down the 50% tariff that India was facing. So that is going to take place. And India will try to make its position clear that it can't, be forced into signing an agreement which is unfair and has no reciprocity built into it.
Right.
And
so,
India,
Mr. Dasgupta, Ambassador Dasgupta, the pressure is on because, there is, of course, a deadline approaching. But, the pressure is on both the nation. It's on US, it's on India. Do you think India will, successfully be able to negotiate a country-specific exemption? Because since you rightly mentioned that 60 countries in totality have been named under Section 301 investigations.
I don't think the US will exempt completely. So at best, it would say that, all right, we will impose 10%. In lieu of the 10% that they were imposing till now for 150 days, till the 24th of July. So that would remain there. And it could be 12.5% as has been recommended by the Office of the USTR. So that is one part. The second part was the pending proceedings for excess capacity, structural excess capacity. Now, again, that would be used as a leverage to force India and other countries to sign an agreement. The European Union, for instance, had agreed to a set of tariffs. And it is saying that it is not very clear as to which way it will go. So there are many other countries in the same boat. And they will all have to face the US unilateral action. Mind you, this Section 301 unilateral tariffs has been struck down by a dispute settlement body panel in September 2020 in the case of the US tariffs against China. And the US got away with it because it said that it wanted to appeal, and the appellate body was not functioning. So it
Mr.
yes.
Ambassador Das Gupta, from a legal perspective, help us understand, is there a way in which, because CII and many industry bodies are going as a counter to the US 12.5% tariff and, these allegations under Section 301, is there a legal way to prove that, these entire supply chains are free of forced labor that India can, put in as an argument during these hearings?
Put in whatever argument it wants to, but the discretion lies, unfortunately, with the USTR. So he can say heard, rejected, and he can go ahead and impose tariff. That is the bottom line, unfortunately.
Ambassador Das Gupta, thank you so much for joining us today on ET Now and sharing your inputs on the Section 301 hearings, and India is about to counter them this week. Thanks again for joining us on ET Now. Now, moving on, amid renewed concerns over the escalation in the West Asia conflict, International Monetary Fund has cut India's GDP growth forecast for FY27 by 10 BPS to 6.4%, though IMF maintains that India continues to remain amongst the fastest growing major economies. Listen in to what IMF economists said.
India, we have the forecast for this year revised down very slightly by 0.1 percentage point to 6.4, and growth for next year for 2027 revised upward by 0.2 percentage point. And the factors that are underpinning the forecast revisions are basically twofold. On the upside, we have the better than expected outturn in the most recent data, but we also have high frequency indicators through April showing quite a bit of resilience in overall economic activity. But these positive effects are then more than offset for 2026 by the higher energy prices we have in our baseline in the July update, as well as the greater pass-through of those higher oil prices to prices at the pump in India. And moving into 2027, we are expecting a strengthening with the energy shock dissipating and medium-term growth being estimated at around 6.5%, and output growth closing, we expect some pickup there.
Right. Now, the International Monetary Fund modestly downgraded its outlook for the world economy this year, citing the energy shock caused by Iran war. My colleague Anurag Joshi gets us a complete roundup of the IMF outlook.
The International Monetary Fund has unveiled the World Economic Outlook report for July. IMF projects India's economic growth for calendar year 2026 at 7% and 6.4% for the calendar year 2027. The country will remain among the fastest growing major economies, the fund said in the report. The FY27 growth for India is projected at 6.4%, which is 10 basis points lower than the IMF forecast in April, while the FY28 growth forecast is at 6.7%, 20 basis points higher than the April estimate. India's growth is supported by a strong momentum in private consumption and also service activity. India's economy expanded 7.7% in FY26 and 7.1% in FY25. The global growth is projected to be 3% in 2026 and 3.4% in 2027. This compares with the world average growth of 3.5% in 24 and 2025. The global economic growth forecast broadly is unchanged from the April estimates. The modest slowdown reflects the effects of the Middle East war being partly offset by the tech momentum globally, the IMF said. The risks to the outlook are more balanced than in April, but more tilted onto the downside, the fund says about the global growth outlook. China's 2026 growth is forecast to slow to 4.6% in 2026, higher global oil prices, whereas China's 2026 economic growth forecast is 20 basis points higher than the April estimate. The Chinese economy grew 5% in 2025.
Right. Now, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi landing in Australia for the crucial visit, former Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, has highlighted how India-Australia strategic relation can boost cooperation in Indo-Pacific region. Times Network's Zaka Jacob is in an exclusive conversation with Scott Morrison. Here is an excerpt.
Well, first I'd say that I'm a big fan of putting the Indo back in the Indo-Pacific and its priority in the Indo-Pacific dialogue. I'm a keen believer in the Indo-Pacific concept, and as well as a free and open Indo-Pacific, which Shinzo Abe championed, which was, I think, a motivating theme for all of us, Narendra Modi and I, when we first formed the Leaders' Dialogue with President Biden and Prime Minister Suga. So I think that it's critical that we maintain that frame. I wouldn't read, frankly, too much into language changes presently. I think these things can be quite theatrical. I don't know if I really don't think they indicate something more deep at a diplomatic level. I think it is frustrating that there hasn't been able to be a leaders' meeting. The last foreign ministers' meeting in New Delhi, I thought was very constructive. Particularly on issues around maritime security. I thought that was its most important outcome. I think a lot of the other things they were talking around critical minerals, etc., was a restatement of work that I think that was already happening anyway. But it would be good for the leaders to meet. The electoral cycle in the United States, I think, has made that very difficult, combined with what's been happening in the Middle East. So I'm prepared to cut them a bit of slack on that. I hope they're able to perhaps draw a meeting together around the G20 or other events like that, because I really do think it is important that the leaders meet as part of the Quad. That's the whole point of the Leaders' Dialogue, because it brings the whole of government focus, not just a diplomatic focus or not just a defence focus, but one that embraces all aspects of the relationship, because the Quad is not just a defence or security dialogue. It is far more than that. And I think the economic dimension of it is really critical. And right now, I think that means mobilising capital, particularly out of Quad countries where there are deep capital markets, into resilient infrastructure throughout South Asia in particular. And because that is a supply line that we've just seen, if it's interrupted, that can cause all sorts of havoc. And you do want to ensure that there's a free and open Indian Ocean, where India clearly has a primacy.
Now, market regulator SEBI has notified amendments to the foreign portfolio investor regulation, introducing an Indian rupee-based fee framework for foreign investors. My colleague Akanksha joins us with more details on this.
Right. SEBI has notified amendments to the Foreign Portfolio Investors or FPI regulations. The market regulator has replaced the existing US dollar denominated fee structure with an Indian rupee based framework for FPI related fee payments. Now, under the revised rules, registrations and related fees for foreign investors and foreign venture capital investors will be denominated in Indian rupees. Overseas investors can continue to make payments in eligible foreign exchange equivalent to the prescribed rupee amount. For example, the earlier registration fee of $1,000 has now been replaced with 90,000 Indian rupee in eligible foreign exchange equivalent. In fact, SEBI has also revised registration fees and custodian related charges. Besides this, designated depository participants will now have to remit the collected fees to SEBI within 5 working days. Importantly, the new INR based fee payment framework will now come into effect after a 6-month of transition period, giving market participants enough time to migrate to the revised system.
Right, Akanksha, thank you so much for that. Now, India's largest asset management company is set to hit the primary market. SBI Funds Management has filed its red herring prospectus for its IPO, with issue scheduled to open on July 14. The IPO is entirely an offer for sale, with State Bank of India selling a 6.3% stake in asset management company. My colleague Anurag Joshi gets us more details.
SBI Funds Management will open its initial public offering from July 14th to July 16th. SBI Funds Management is a joint venture of State Bank of India and French asset manager Amundi, and it operates SBI Mutual Fund, which is the country's biggest asset management company. Both SBI and Amundi are offloading a total of 10% equity stake in the IPO, and SBI Funds IPO size is seen around $1.2 billion. Given that there will be a 10% dilution in equity through the offer for sale, the valuation for the company is pegged around $12 billion. SBI owns 62% equity stake, while Amundi owns 36% equity stake in the company. So both the founders are selling a total of around 204 million shares. SBI is selling 128.3 million shares, or 6.3% equity stake in the company. Amundi is selling 75.4 million shares, or 3.7% equity stake in the company. SBI Funds Management manages more than 12.5 trillion rupees of assets in the country.
Right, Anurag, thank you so much for those details. It is time for us to slip into a very short break. You don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Now, Wall Street is witnessing a sharp sell-off after U.S. President Donald Trump signaled that attacks on Iran would continue. Dow Jones is slipping around 800 points or 1.5%, while S&P 500 and Nasdaq Composite both are down around 1%. Energy market also reacted strongly to the renewed tensions. U.S. crude prices surged above $75 per barrel. Now, moving on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Ankara, U.S. President Donald Trump also struck an optimistic note on Ukraine war after meeting Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump said Washington would consider security for Ukraine if required, while stressing that his immediate priority is to save lives and end the war. Let's listen in.
We want to do it. We'll do it to save lives. Look, Ukraine's very far away. We have an ocean separating us. What I'm doing is I'm trying to save lives. A lot of lives are being lost. I also think that it's a country with great potential. I think if this kind of brain power can go toward rebuilding the country instead of fighting a war, I think that country is going to do fantastically well.
Now, the FIFA Football World Cup quarter-final lineup is now complete, but not before delivering another night of unforgettable drama. Argentina staged one of the biggest comebacks in the World Cup, recovering from 2-0 down to beat Egypt 3-2 in the final round of 16 fixture. Switzerland edged past Colombia in the penalty shootout to seal the last quarter-final berth. The spotlight now shifts to the last 8, where France take on Morocco, Spain face Belgium, Lionel Messi's Argentina meets Switzerland, and England lock horns with Erling Haaland's Norway for a place in the semi-finals. And now it's time for our final FIFA Football World Cup trivia of the day. Did you know that the longest unbeaten run in the FIFA Football World Cup history belongs to Italy? Now, between 1934 and 1938, Azzurri remained unbeaten across 2 editions of the tournament, winning back-to-back World Cup titles and creating one of football's most remarkable records. And before we leave, don't miss Football and Fortune, ET Now special on FIFA Football World Cup 2026 as the tournament builds towards its grand finale. We go beyond the action onto the pitch to decode the business of football, from billion-dollar revenues and sponsorships to global economic impact of the world's biggest sporting event. Catch Football and Fortune on July 17th at 9 p.m. only on ET Now. Well, with that's a wrap on this edition of Business at 9. Goodbye from me, Shibani Gharat, and the entire team of ET Now.